Thank you.
Thank you very much for this announcement. And ladies and gentlemen, this is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the opening segment of this year Accessible Europe. This opening segment is joined by several leaders of the Europe region, and it's my great pleasure to start the opening ceremony with the invitation to Her Excellency Alexandra Litau, the Minister of the Modernization of State and Public Administration of Portugal, and to provide the keynote address of Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union. Her Excellency, the floor is yours.
Dear United Nations representatives, ITU and European Commission, and all the participants that will join this event for the next days. It's an honor to host the Accessible Europe ICT for All Forum. Portugal is a proud founding member of the International Telecommunication Union, as we actively take part in all its sectors and strongly support the work being undertaken regarding accessibility and social inclusion. Knowing that 1 billion people living with disabilities, 80% of those in developing nations, a global development agenda cannot ignore disabilities, a key driver of exclusion and poverty. That is why this forum is deeply rooted with the 2030 Agenda and its associated Sustainable Development Goals that engages all the member states in fostering global development. We host this forum under the scope of the Portuguese presidency of the Council of European Union, showing our commitment with this topic. Time to deliver a fair, green and digital recovery is the motto of our presidency. Digital transition is not only a recovery catalyst, but also a keystone of the European Pillar of Social Rights, assuming the digital transformation must be fair, inclusive, and be used at the service of the citizens. This role of technology in the public sector will also be part of the agenda of the informal meeting of Ministers of Public Administration in the European Union scheduled for June 22. The Portuguese presidency wants to foster cooperation towards more transparent, open, participatory, innovative and agile public administrations. I have always defended that states should lead by example, and therefore, when it comes to public services, digital inclusion cannot be thought of as abstract concept. This principle must be something concrete for citizens as we work every day to achieve this goal. Taking into consideration the social pillar within the Portuguese presidency, I would like to draw your attention to the social summit will be held in June in Porto. It will focus on how to strengthen Europe's social dimension to meet the challenges of climate change and digital transition. Mainstreaming accessibility in digital transition in a key policy tool for ensuring equal opportunities for all and that no one is left behind. Therefore, I'm sure that some conclusions of the ICT for All Forum will be of the utmost importance in feeding the social summit outcomes as well. As a country, we will also surely benefit with the knowledge and best practices to be shared in these days. Our commitment with accessibility is well known among our European partners. In fact, Portugal was the first European country having W3C accessibility requirements for websites in legislation since 1999. And this topic remains a priority in our political agenda, being present in the main Portuguese public administration strategies, namely in the Innovation and Modernization Strategy for the State and the Public Administration 2020 to 2023, in the Action Plan for Digital Transition, and in the incoming National Strategy for the Inclusion of People with Disabilities 2021 to 2025, that goes beyond digital accessibility and highlights a set of specific initiatives and measures that seek to promote autonomy, participation, and self-determination of people with disabilities. We aim to make customer services spaces more inclusive, whether physical or virtual, creating personalized service conditions for senior citizens, expanding the phone translation service, and providing services that guarantee access to people with disabilities. Our goal is ambitious. By 2023, we want that 90% of digital services will have the seal of usability and accessibility. Plus, the accessibility portal launched last October provides information and tools to support public administration in making websites more inclusive for users with visual or hearing difficulties, as well as websites and mobile applications that guarantee a better digital experience for all citizens, including those with motor, sensory, or cognitive limitations. At the same time, we have also launched a training program in accessibility and digital usability. 5 months later, this program already had more than 1,600 registered trainees. I truly believe that technology is an instrument to support the implementation of public policies, and our Recovery and Resilience Plan, which provides an unparalleled investment in public administration and clearly reflects our commitment to digital transformation. Digital is taking over not only online, but also physical day-to-day interactions. Digital inclusion is fundamental for the development of societies and economic recovery across Europe, and it is leaving no one behind. And Portugal, as President of the Council, hopes to build political momentum around this cornerstone of the European values, from Portugal and Europe to the world, and with all our international partners, with all of you. Believing that this forum will be an important contribution to discuss and share perspectives towards a more inclusive digital Europe, I wish you all an excellent journey, and thank you very much for your participation.
Her Excellency, thank you very much for this strategic message. And now it's my great pleasure to turn to the two speakers of our opening session. Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, Director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau of the International Telecommunication Union, and Ms. Helena Dalli, the Commissioner for the Equality at the European Commission. And we'll start with Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yaroslav. Her Excellency Alexandra Leitão, Minister of Modernization of State and Public Administration of Portugal, our host of this regional event. Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, Prime Minister of Serbia, Madam Helena Dalli, European Commission Commissioner for Equality, Madam Catherine Naughton, Director of the European Disability Forum. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this third edition of the ITU-EC Regional Forum, Accessible Europe, ICTs for All. Accessible Europe is our joint flagship initiative with the European Commission aimed at accelerating digital accessibility across Europe, targeting both the European Union and non-European Union countries of the continent. It's held within the framework of the Regional Initiative for Europe on Digital Inclusion that was adopted at the ITU Development Conference, the WTDC, and designed by European member states who recognize the importance of digital accessibility as a top priority to ensure that no one is left behind. We have already heard from the Minister that it is an important milestone of the Portuguese presidency of the EU Council. And I would really like to thank the government of Portugal for your commitment, as well as your leadership in working towards a digital world built on equal opportunities. Given that around 15% of the world's population, or an estimated 1 billion people, as the minister has just noted, live with disabilities, accessibility of ICTs has become more relevant and more necessary than ever. An estimated 80 million persons with disabilities live in Europe alone. Persons with disabilities are an integral part of today's digital society, but they often encounter discrimination and exclusion. And unfortunately, the COVID pandemic has had this exacerbated impact on persons with disabilities in terms of access to education, healthcare, employment opportunities, and it really has put the spotlight on the issue and the urgency around ensuring accessibility throughout. Digital accessibility constitutes one of ITU's top priorities. It is embedded in the Union's strategic goals, targeting enabling environments that ensure accessible telecommunications and ICTs for persons with disabilities, and that they be established in all countries, these policies and enabling frameworks, by 2023. Of course, 2023 is just around the corner. And we at the ITU stand committed to support all countries to advance their efforts to make digital accessibility a reality. I would really like to thank the Prime Minister of Serbia, who has taken concrete steps in this direction. And it's really been a great pleasure for us at the ITU to accompany Serbia in this endeavor. And I think you can certainly count on us for future support. As part of our efforts to spotlight the importance of digital accessibility, it does also bring me great pleasure to launch today the ICT Accessibility Assessments for the European region. This is the result of many months, several months of work with European administrations, as well as regional organizations, and I do want to thank you all for your great cooperation. Together, we were able to get a clear picture of the status of digital accessibility across the region, as well as to identify the gaps that we still need to fill through concrete actions. For us in the ITU, we are on our way to the World Telecommunications Development Conference, the WTDC, which is planned for later this year, where we anticipate a concrete digital development roadmap as an outcome. And of course, digital inclusion, and in particular, digital accessibility, will be a key pillar. And I would like to encourage all of you to join the preparatory process, our Road to Addis, our regional discussions, because I believe that the WTDC will be a landmark development conference. We held last week our Road to Addis event on digital inclusion, and our expert participants were clear. We need to come up with accessibility solutions, not for, but with, and I stress with, the diverse groups of people that are going to use them. And while we advance technological innovation, we must keep in mind the users, the people, and their diverse needs. And this goes in line, of course, with Europe's human-centered digital agenda and the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen's apt description of the European way to digital innovation, one at which human beings are at the center. I'm glad to see that the Accessible Europe Initiative continues to engage all countries and all stakeholders throughout the region, not only through events, but also through direct assistance, through policy guidance, and regional competitions to identify accessible solutions for all. And I'm pleased to see the many finalists of this year's innovation contest. I'm really looking forward to hearing their pitches in the coming hours. And I would invite you all to support these incredible innovators. They are truly leading by example in their great work done towards transforming the European accessibility ecosystem. And before I close, I also want to acknowledge and thank our partners, the European Commission, of course, our host, the government of Portugal, specifically the AMA, ANACOM, and INR of Portugal, and many others, for their great commitment to working collectively and collaboratively so that we can make the vision of a digitally accessible Europe a reality. And I look forward to hearing your inputs the discussions. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I will conclude and I hand back to you, Yaroslav. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this inspiring opening speech. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to invite to take the floor Ms. Helena Dalli, Commissioner for Equality at the European Commission. Ms. Dalli, the floor is yours. Ms. Dalli, we just checking if we have some technical glitch. I don't see. So let me one more time welcome Ms. Helena Dalli to make her intervention.
I think Ms. Helena Dalli joining us with attendees link. So if our IS moderator can be kindly promote her to be our panelist. Thank you so much for that.
So let's have a bit of patience before the message of the commissioner will come.
Yeah, now we have her with us.
Great, welcome Ms. Dalli with us, and I'm handing over directly to you for the opening speech.
Okay, good morning. So we're talking about accessibility, and I wasn't accessible. So thank you for inviting me to participate to this forum. Information and communication technology should be accessible to all. You have my full support in working to achieve this goal. This event shows the power of technology in breaking down barriers to inclusion and participation. During the COVID pandemic, technology has played a critical role in allowing us to continue our work, to share our experiences, and to communicate our expectations. When technology is accessible, it is a powerful tool for persons with disabilities to participate as active members of society on an equal basis with others. It is with pleasure that I present the most recent commitments of the European Commission to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. Earlier this month, the Commission adopted the new strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities for 2021 to 2030. The strategy is of paramount importance as it will set the scene for EU disability policy for the coming decade. The strategy aligns EU disability policy with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Convention is the compass which guides us in the elaboration of this text. The new strategy embraces a human rights approach to disability. The strategy reflects disability in all its diversity, comprising long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which are often invisible. It also sets out measures to tackle the barriers persons with disabilities face. The strategy focuses on areas where EU action can bring the most added value, but at the same time, it strongly calls on member states to work together to implement the convention. The strategy covers a wide range of policy areas, and today I will focus on the first of its priority areas, which is accessibility. Accessibility remains the key enabler of rights, autonomy, and equality, and will continue to have a prominent role. In 2019, I had the opportunity to participate to the second edition of Accessible Europe, hosted in Malta. There I spoke about the recent adoption of a number of important EU legal instruments in the area of information and communication technology. Those legal instruments include significant provisions relating to accessibility in telecommunication, audiovisual media services, public sector websites, and key products and services. This also includes their user interface, their functioning, and their websites. The newly adopted EU strategy confirms the Commission's attention to these issues. We will continue to monitor the correct implementation of existing EU accessibility legislation. In the years to come, we will evaluate its application and assess whether it should be revised to address any gaps, and we will consider the need for further legislative action. We will also continue to mainstream accessibility in new legal and policy instruments for an inclusive digital transition. Member states are making efforts to recover from the pandemic, and EU funds are there to support. Member states are encouraged to mainstream accessibility in their resilience and recovery plans. The strategy fosters the development of human-centric and user-friendly digital public services across Europe. These services should respond to the needs and preferences of European citizens, including the needs of persons with disabilities. In the strategy, the Commission announced the launch of a European Resource Centre, Accessible EU. This flagship initiative will bring together relevant national authorities to increase access to knowledge and training. This will facilitate implementation and enforcement of EU accessibility rules. Accessible EU will be a place to share good practices and to inspire policy developments. It will support the development of tools and standards. To achieve a barrier-free Europe, the Commission equally counts on the active engagement of all stakeholders, including organizations for persons with disabilities, industry, public authorities, and accessibility experts. Together we share a wealth of technical knowledge and expertise, as you shall see in the coming days in the event we are co-organizing. I thank the International Telecommunication Union and the Portuguese presidency for sharing with us the efforts to build a union of equality. I offer our work to contribute to this endeavor. 10 years have passed since the EU ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We must scale up European action. It is our duty to ensure the enjoyment of equal rights and the full participation of persons with disabilities in our societies. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dali, for this speech. And ladies and gentlemen, now it's my great pleasure and honor to move to our next special address of this opening ceremony. Her Excellency Ana Brnabić, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Serbia. Her Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good day to all of you. Distinguished Minister Litau, esteemed Commissioner Dali and Director Bogdan, representatives of the international community and European Commission, fellow guests, I'm honored to represent my country, Serbia, at this important gathering and to address all of you today. Let me first congratulate our hosts, the Portuguese, for their presidency of the European Union. Also, the International Telecommunications Union and the European Commission for organizing this forum. and especially for bringing us together to discuss how to bridge the digital divide. Over the past few years, digital transformation has been one of the key pillars of my government. We perceive digitization as a necessity, a way to offer better public services, higher quality education, more competitive job market, and an attractive business environment. The coronavirus pandemic proved that the decision to turn to innovation and digitization was right and perhaps even crucial. Years of technology-driven reforms made us here in Serbia more resilient and more agile. In 2020, we had one of the best results in Europe in terms of GDP. Our GDP declined only by about 1%. Today, we have the second highest vaccination rate in Europe, only after the United Kingdom. The innovative advances of the past allowed us to shape a rapid response to the COVID-19 crisis and were instrumental for the successful launch of our entire immunization campaign. Today, we are proud to have a country mobilized behind the digital agenda, but we have a responsibility to ensure that all citizens can benefit from these efforts. With the rapid advancement of technologies, risks of social exclusion tend to multiply, impacting obviously the most vulnerable population. To ensure that no one is left behind, we must guarantee two basic preconditions: digital literacy and digital connectivity to all our citizens. We started by reforming our education system through digitizing schools. As of 2017, we have started connecting all schools to high-speed internet access, introducing digital textbooks and digital classrooms. Our goal is to complete this effort and fully digitize our schools by the end of 2022. This landmark project has been replicated in several other European countries, allowing students the opportunity to access information online and become themselves digital creators. We were also amongst the first countries in Europe to introduce coding and programming as mandatory subjects in primary schools. Many students continue specialized IT programs in high schools as well. We are expanding the capacity of our technical faculties by about 20% and plan to further increase enrollment. We are also trying to utilize as much as possible informal education. In 2017, we have launched retraining programs in IT, and we currently have over 2,000 people either employed or changed their career as a result of this retraining. Our specific focus in terms of retraining is currently on persons with disabilities in order to empower them and increase their employability. COVID-19 pandemic further increased our reliance on the internet, but thanks in part to these programs, we were equipped to ensure life could continue online. Many of our citizens, even our seniors, were immediately able to resume their lives, even after the lockdown, by communicating, shopping, and conducting business online. Our children prospered as well, but by not wasting even a single day of school. Students were able to plug in online education platforms the day after the state of emergency in Serbia was declared. In addition to literacy, we want to make sure that everyone is connected. And our overarching goal is to provide broadband to 99% of households by 2025. We plan to reach this goal by incentivizing private sector investments that can fund the rural broadband program. It is designed to deliver high-speed and affordable communications to over 500,000 households in sparsely populated areas. We view access to basic broadband as a human right and see the parallel establishment of a universal service obligation as critical to reinforce the right of citizens to a decent and affordable broadband connection. And as we work to strengthen our digital society, we continue to pay close attention to the most vulnerable social groups and those most likely to be excluded. With that in mind, last year, we adopted a national strategy for improving the status of persons with disabilities, which focuses on ensuring access to communication and information, implementing accessibility standards, and enhancing the use of assistive technologies. This year, with the support of International Telecommunications Union, we conducted the National ICT Accessibility Study, which will be published soon. The study lays out an overview on the status of ICT accessibility in Serbia, accompanied by principles, guidelines, good practices, and actions needed to support its implementation. This cooperation between our government and ITU lays the foundation for future steps to guarantee a fully inclusive society. The current technology revolution brings unprecedented change to how we live and work at an unprecedented pace. Despite continuous efforts, there is still a long way to go to reach genuine equality, fairness, inclusion, and accessibility in the digital era and in our constantly evolving societies. The best way to do this is through international cooperation. Cooperation between countries and across international institutions must continue, as it will be pivotal in ensuring we all bridge the digital divide. I want to thank the International Telecommunications Union and the European Commission for supporting Serbia along the way, and to reiterate our commitment to making the world a better place where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Her Excellency, thank you very much for this message, and thank you very much for joining us on this special occasion and celebration of the digital accessibility at the European level. And now let me move to a next strategic message, a message of the organization representing the persons with disabilities. And I have a great pleasure to introduce Catherine Noton, who is Director at the European Disability Foundation.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation for us to address this conference, to the International Telecommunications Union, to the European Commission, and of course to the European Council Presidency, Portugal. I want to first apologise on behalf of the President of the European Disability Forum, Yanis Varoufakis, who cannot be here this morning. The European Disability Forum is a network of around 100 organisations of persons with disabilities, and we advocate for the rights of 100 million persons with disabilities in the EU. Our work aims for the full implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the EU and its member states. And of course, we're members of the International Disability Alliance, and we work on the promotion of the rights of people with disabilities globally. We're an advocacy organisation. We try to influence the work of the European Union and its institutions through the meaningful participation of persons with disabilities in policy making. We value very much the efforts made by the European Commission and ITU when it comes to developing and promoting standards, trainings and solutions in support of accessibility policies to information and communication technologies for persons with disabilities. In the past year, much progress has finally been achieved in the EU when it comes to equal access to ICT. We know this progress goes beyond the EU as well, especially with the keynote address we've just had from the Prime Minister of Serbia. In the EU, we ratified the Marrakesh Treaty. We adopted important legislation on web accessibility for the public sector, on electronic communications, on audiovisual media services. We finally succeeded in having a horizontal legislation on accessibility, known as the European Accessibility Act, which has a very strong ICT component. In our view, the Accessibility Act represents a turning point for accessibility in Europe, not only concerning current technology, but also for the technology yet to come. And to underpin these legislation, we also need technical standards suitable for industry, for public administrations and users, because these standards build the foundations from which inclusive innovation can emerge. This already happened when the US introduced its first accessibility standard in legislation in the late 90s, and we know it's happening in Europe. The positive adoption of these ambitious European laws and standards was also possible thanks to the active involvement of disability organisations like EDF and our members, even though we still struggle to work on standards on an equal footing with other stakeholders. The Commission, under the leading role of Commissioner Dalli, has understood the importance of consulting with persons with disabilities and their representative organisations in all matters which concern them. The most recent example is the newly published European Disability Rights Strategy, already mentioned by the Commissioner this morning, in which accessibility remains as one of its core priority areas. Organisations of persons with disabilities were consulted throughout the development of the strategy. One of the flagship initiatives of the Disability Strategy, as mentioned by our Quality Commissioner this morning, is the creation of a knowledge centre known as Accessible EU, in which national and international experts will exchange information and conduct trainings on accessibility standards. And conferences such as this one represent a great opportunity to build this network of experts and speed up the uptake of accessibility by a broader range of sectors. Now, this is needed more than ever. In addition to the dreadful situation brought by COVID-19 to millions of persons with disabilities, the pandemic also catapulted our societies into a more digital life, which in principle should have meant also more equal access to persons with disabilities. Unfortunately, due to the poor design of certain technologies and wrong choices of certain public authorities and companies, instead of benefiting from this digital opportunity, many persons with disabilities still face barriers preventing them from studying and working remotely, or communicating with family and friends, or accessing culture and leisure through ICT. Technology helped many people to cope with the situation, but in still many cases neglected persons with disabilities. We did not use the full opportunities. We talked early of technological evolution or revolution. Of course, we have been catapulted forward on this by the COVID-19 pandemic. But good news is that technologies evolve rapidly. They can be rapidly changed and replaced for more inclusive ones with far more possibilities and functions. And one of the key factors, as with the preparation of the legal framework, is to involve persons with disabilities in the development of these technologies usable by all. We now have the legislation, we have key standards, but to really achieve accessibility by default, we need to keep on raising awareness and developing the necessary tools so that public authorities, companies, innovators, and future professionals consider accessibility as one of the core aspects of new technologies, so that accessibility comes by default. I wish us all to achieve this goal soon and wish you all fruitful discussions during the conference. Thank you so much again for the invitation this morning. I give you back the floor, Yaroslav.
Dear Catherine, thank you very much for your message, which we are very well taking on and note on. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention, but more importantly, I would like to thank all leaders of Europe for contributing to this opening ceremony of Accessible Europe. With this, we can declare the Accessible Europe open. Thank you very much for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, and now after this very inspiring opening segment of the European Accessible Europe, let's move to the next agenda point. Before we are starting with the first agenda point and the first session, we would like to bring to your attention the highlights of the all foundations, how the Accessible Europe agenda has been constructed, and what was our motivation, joint motivation of all partners joining the forces in order to not only discuss, but also implement at the European level. I would like to request my colleagues to share the slides, which I will be using in order to set the regional context for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, the accessibility is very high on the agenda of all member states. There is no doubt on that, and it was already for a long time. Next slide. This is the reason that already almost over 8 years ago, the European countries, member states at the level of the Development Conference of the ITU brought the accessibility to the level of the regional priority for Europe, covering 46 countries and being the home for almost 700 million citizens. Next slide. But this has been still reinforced later on, making sure that accessibility is part of the digital inclusion target, which has been set by the member states, expecting and committing to establish enabling environments, ensuring accessible telecommunication ICT for persons with disabilities in countries, all countries, by 2023. This is the reason why on this year we have decided to carry out the regional assessment, the ICT accessibility assessment for Europe region. Next slide, please, which takes a stock on this, what we have achieved as the region in terms of digital accessibility and where the gaps still remains. I would like to invite all of you to visit the website of the event and download the copy and take a look at the great achievements our region has noted. Also, taking a look at the areas where the further efforts are needed. There is no doubt on this that Europe is leading by example in many areas. Accessibility belongs to this, and we are very proud of this. But still, at the regional level, we have a lot of work to be done. Next slide, please. So, of course, let's start from the few treaties where the European region is proudly engaged in and has ratified, almost all countries have ratified them. As we see, at the level of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 44 countries out of the 46 have ratified this international treaty. The CRPD optional protocol, which is adding additional issues not covered under the CRPD, have been ratified by 29 countries out of the 46. Also, at the level of Marrakesh Treaty, we have identified that only 20 countries have signed this document. Next slide, please. Also, at the level of the anti-discrimination and equality law, the majority of the countries have adopted anti-discrimination and equality laws and implemented the provisions of the CRPD in national laws, ensuring non-discrimination and equality for persons with disabilities. However, definitions of disability vary across national legislations and still often stem from the context of social security legislation rather than anti-discrimination law. There are also different methods identified across the countries for the implementation or transposition of international or EU laws. According to the ITU data, sign language is recognized by 23 countries, of which 4, including Portugal, have recognized national sign language in their constitutions. Congratulations for this move. Other countries have passed laws that make direct or indirect reference to the sign language. Next slide, please. A total of 41 countries have adopted or plan to adopt web accessibility laws or statutory requirements. Among these, the 27 EU member states have transposed the EU Web Accessibility Directive, and 3 countries of the EIA countries and Switzerland are also expected to do so, although they are seeking longer transition periods. The 5 EU candidate countries are also expected to transpose EU accessibility directive, and several other countries also closely follow the EU law. Israel is the only country that requires private sector organizations to provide accessible web pages as well, which is very good example and to take a look. Also at the level of the electronic communication, there is no, and we cannot deny that in Europe, in the international comparison, the European countries provide very good connectivity, but also at the very low prices. Next slide, please. Access to emergency services via the SMS for persons with disabilities is provided in 22 EU member states, UK, and 3 EEA countries and Switzerland. In most countries, such access is provided through the single European emergency number 112, where in some countries it is provided through alternative numbers. According to the ITU survey, in 12 countries, emergency services are accessible through an application. In some countries, access through applications is offered regionally. In 10 countries, emergency services are available through telecommunication relay services, text or video relay services. In 10 countries, there are text or video relay services available for the deaf and hard of hearing. Video relay services is usually not available 24/7, which is a serious limitation. In several countries, there are also video remote interpreting service available. Next slide, please. But let's take a look at the media services. Media service providers may be required by law to make their programs accessible. So as you will see in the coming 2 slides, there are several developments in the countries in terms of the subtitles, live subtitles, audio subtitles, description, signing, live signing, website accessibility, and must carry obligation. I will not recall all of them, but we see that there is still some way to go to make sure that these services are everywhere available in all countries. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. In terms of the public procurement, ITU estimates that over 30 countries have enshrined in low functional accessibility requirements for public procurement of ICT products and services, following the adoption of the European Public Procurement Directives in 2014. Some of non-EU EEA countries have also reported the application of these requirements at the national procurement laws. ITU estimates also that around 1/3 of the countries regulate specific aspects of accessibility requirements for products and services as foreseen in European Accessibility Act. There is a lot of room for improvement in this area. ITU estimates also that more than half of the countries have laws and regulations in place defining accessibility requirements for ICT services and content produced, developed, maintained, made available, and used in public or private education institutions by administrations, teachers, students, and staff. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look where we stand. It's difficult to deny that Europe has made significant progress in terms of building the enabling environment for digital accessibility. This concerns the adoption of laws and regulation, where in majority of countries we have already web accessibility and electronic communications covered. We have considered a number of the countries which addressed already the audiovisual media services, public procurement of ICT products and services, accessibility requirements for ICT, accessibility in education, and only few countries worked on the accessibility requirements for products and services. Also, there is a need for strong commitment and also a lot of work to be done in order to advance the remaining gaps. This is the reason, next slide, and the next slide, and the next. This is the reason why we are so grateful to so many partners who joined Accessible Europe in order to advance digital accessibility. Not only talking about the policies, but also building the ecosystem, reviewing the policies and strategies and the implementation at the country and the regional level, but also incorporating from the design point of view the standards and for products and services, while working on the innovation for the Accessible Europe and providing and supporting the development of the human capacity in this field, which is still a challenge across our region. With this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you will have some moments of reflection on this, where we stand as the European region. And this brings me to the first panel of this event, which is focusing on which is welcoming three distinguished guests, and is focusing on the international, European, and EU vision on policies and strategies, targets, and the key resources to advance the ICTs accessibility. I have a great pleasure to welcome to join me Roxana Widmer-Iliescu, Senior Coordinator of Digital Inclusion of Telecommunication Development Bureau of the ITU, Immaculada Plasencia Torrero, Senior Expert of Disability and Inclusion Unit at the DG for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion at the European Commission, as well as Mr. Laszlo Lovasi, Senior Research Fellow of the University of Public Service, Hungary, but formerly the member of the CRPD and strong advocate for the ICTs. This brings me to the first discussion, and I would like to invite all the speakers to turn on your cameras to be visible for all our audience. Can I request our technical support to do so? And to spotlight our speakers. Excellent. Thank you very much for doing so. And now, dear ladies and gentlemen, let's start with our first speakers. We observed that strong commitments at the global and the UN level are in place to guarantee inclusion of all people, including those with disabilities in all aspects of life. What is the role of the ICTs in accelerating implementation of these global commitments? Roxana. You are muted.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Yaroslav. Well, leaving no one behind is a goal for everyone who works to continue and contribute to leave behind a more inclusive and a better world for future generations. But to achieve this commitment, we should keep in mind that our world is digital, and therefore ICT play a key role for each of us, and each of us is different. With this difference in mind, we can say that ICT are embedded in almost all aspects of our life. So to receive information, to communicate and interact with our families and loved ones, to receive education, to work, buy products, and access the vital services provided by governments, and much more. Since we are living in a digital world, the right to be able to access to and use of information, to be able to communicate, became a human right. But if this technology for information and communication, developed and delivered to be accessed, understood, and so used by everyone? This is a fundamental question. And also, which is a sine qua non condition to ensure that everyone can equally and equitably be empowered by the technology and so be included in the digital ecosystem that is around us? And is this even possible? And if so, how? The good and short answer is yes, it's possible. And the how is by developing technology with a universal design in mind and by delivering the information and communication in accessible formats. So what we call by fulfilling with ICT accessibility standards and requirements. We all know that digital accessibility is recognized as a key priority to ensure digital inclusion of all people and thus guarantee that no one is left behind, not only in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, but also in transforming the World 2030 Agenda, in the Sustainable Development Goals, and more recently reiterated in the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. And all these commitments are fully considered within our work in ITU, as previously stated by our director, and as previously stated for all the speakers. But why is so important ICT accessibility in the context of digital inclusion? Let's try to explain it simple. If I will continue to deliver this presentation in Romanian, which is my mother tongue, how many people will understand what I'm talking about now? Vă rog să-mi spuneți tot ceea ce ați înțeles. And if from your side, you will further respond to me in Polish, could we pretend that this dialogue is inclusive? Well, it's the same for technology. The common language of the digital is accessibility. Since technology is evolving in an exponential manner, if we don't take into account accessibility aspects as a catalytic driver to enable anyone to understand information and to communicate, so to use the ICT, instead of bridging the digital divide, we will expand it. The world digital leaders understood this many years ago and adjusted their target priorities and businesses accordingly. To avoid indicated company names, I will only say that these were those who pioneered the development of smart technologies or the services that adds more features to the traditional office softwares. I think you all identify the companies that I'm talking about and the ones that are very much attached to accessibility. The smart technology is an accessible technology because can be equally used by person with or without disabilities, by illiterates, by migrants, by young and old people, because anyone can communicate by using the accessibility features embedded in these devices, sometimes without even realizing that we are using it. Do we all know that by using voice or text messages, or the text-to-speech or software to read our mails while doing something else, or the speech-to-text to write quickly our mails, are actually accessibility features? Or the system software that most of us are daily using, like Siri or Cortana, to perform for us a task we want, or set alarms, ask for help around me, tell me this and tell me that. They are accessible features, and we all use it. And also, how many digital communicators when deliver and post information and reports and pictures and videos in the websites or social networks, they do it in accessible formats. How many of communicators who use different digital platforms use this new common language, common digital language, which is accessibility, to guarantee that they informative messages are delivered to be understood by everyone. Accessibility of ICTs therefore plays an important role, not only across industries and private sector, but also for governments. Many countries and regions, as is the case of Europe region, put in their political agenda as a priority the need to adapt their policies and regulatory measures to the digital trends to make it inclusive. Digital accessibility has become crucial to safeguard equally and equitably the life of all citizens. We also saw this in particular in time of crisis and emergencies such as COVID now, when governments were called to ensure that everyone can access, understand, and use the vital information and public services to save the life of everyone without any discrimination. And by doing so, governments can ensure digital inclusion of all citizens and increase also their countries' growth within the digital economic environment. So to conclude, accessible ICTs can open pathway to an important and improvement quality of life, greater social and economic inclusion, and self-empowerment of all people. No doubt that ICTs are a major catalyst to ensure full participation of everyone without any discrimination in the digital economy. And therefore, I will say that digital accessibility is instrumental in accelerating implementation of all related global commitments, ensuring that inclusiveness of all people, regardless of their age, gender, or ability in the digital society, in the digital world.
Thank you very much, Roxana, for this intervention. And let me pass now to our colleagues from the European Commission. Today, we are joined by the Immaculada Placencia Porrero, who is leading the ICT accessibility at the European Commission level. We have heard a lot from the Commission already, the excellent announcement about this new strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2030, which has been just published by the European Commission. Could you share with us, Ima, what is for the ICT accessibility in there?
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you very well.
Okay, good. So, well, let me start by apologizing because due to technical problems, I'm only able to join you by phone. And it is really, it's really a pity, but I have really not been able to deblock the situation, and Zoom has blocked me now for half an hour my account because I try too often. So I would start by complimenting the wise words that Roxana made by saying that technology can also put us in a very difficult situations when we are trying to connect, when the things do really, for whatever reason, settings, complexity do not work well together. And I think that this brings us to the wise, let's say, remarks that technology needs to be accessible, but it also needs really to be simple and easy to use. And sometimes things are really, complicated. Anyway, let me turn to our strategy. I will try to give you some general remarks about our strategy, our new strategy. It was adopted on the 3rd of March, with a focus on elements related to accessibility. But first, I would really like to share with you some of the key background elements of this strategy that is really anchored on the values of the European Treaty, including on non-discrimination and equality, into the European Pillar of Social Rights principles, including the full participation of persons with disabilities in economy and society, and of course on the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The strategy aims to cover, and it covers in different ways all the rights addressed in the treaty, so in this international treaty, in the convention, and it really has a strong focus also on accessibility. First, it acknowledges the difficulties that persons with disabilities have been facing because of limited accessibility in the times of the COVID pandemic. As we see today, and I have experienced today, that we are dependent on technology. And when technology is not fully accessible, persons with disabilities have experienced problems with teleconferencing, online shopping, distance learning, teleworking, and many other more. So accessibility is put in the strategy as an enabler of rights, as an enabler for participation. And we really highlight the fact that a lot has been done in setting up a policy and legal framework for, particularly for ICT accessibility. We also have in other areas, like, for example, transport, where a lot has been done. But in the area of ICT accessibility, we have invested a lot in setting up EU rules that cover products and services, public sector websites, telecommunications, audiovisual media, and some enabling other type of legislation like copyright legislation to ensure that exceptions can be made so that copyright would not be a barrier for persons with disabilities to access content. We have also put, as acknowledged in the strategy, a lot of work in setting up standards, and now we see that major EU policies are there to address the digital transformation and digital, including in digital public services that need to be inclusive and accessible for persons with disabilities, as the strategy say. We also have to address those situations where technology is used, access to emergency services, for example, for persons with disabilities. And it is essential to realize that technology more and more is being used in a context. For example, yesterday we were having an event on standard that we have been supporting the development of the built environment, where a complete chapter is dedicated to technology used in buildings, for example. So this is really very important, that this technology is also made accessible. Now, when it comes to the strategy, beyond identifying also some gaps, the strategy proposes some concrete actions. The idea is to implement, to create, to support the implementation of all these policies and legislation by the creation of a new resource center that is going to be called Accessible EU. And that center is aiming to increase coherence in the accessibility policies and facilitate access to the knowledge. It will be a kind of cooperation framework where we will bring together national authorities responsible for implementing and enforcing accessibility rules with experts, professionals from all areas of accessibility, including, of course, ICT area, and with also persons with disabilities and their organizations. And the idea is to share good practices, to inspire policy developments at national and EU level, and to develop this set of tools and standards and facilitate training. In addition, we will be soon publishing a guide to describing, among other things, how to buy accessible in public procurement, and it will have clear references to the area of ICT. And I would like also to refer to the actions that relate to EU digital governance strategy that needs to be human-centric, user-friendly, and to ensure that public services across the EU responds to the needs and preferences of persons with disabilities. I am referring to the role that and the work being done and the so-called Berlin Declaration. In the area of the web, we are working on assessing whether the Web Accessibility Directive needs to be revised to address any gaps. So now this directive is already being implemented and working. Now we are going to assess whether it needs to be, there are gaps that require additional action. So let me say that we will link and the strategy refers to it, this digital transformation to different rights and different areas. For example, the area of justice, where the digital transition is happening, accessibility is also going to be really present there. This is just one example, and I think just to finish, I would like to say that the strategy uses or addresses other areas where digital accessible technologies are essential. For example, also the area of education, the area of the employment, the democratic participation, where information needs to be provided to the citizen in accessible formats. Then the area of independent living. And my last, and many others, my last point is going to be to the commitment undertaken in the strategy for the Commission to lead by example, where clear actions are spelled out to make the European Commission and as an institution, and that not only for its employees, but also for the public, to make it more accessible, and making more accessible the websites, the tools, for example, for used within the Commission itself, and actions. We have got clear actions also to develop and plan on web accessibility that will be shared also, by the way, with other institutions in order to align with European standards. With this, I think you got a general overview of the content of the strategy, and I pass the floor to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this overview. There is a lot of expectation because you designed so many things which our community was always thinking about, and we are so happy that certain things will be just happening. And I assume that I'm speaking on behalf of many who are today with us, who are just waiting for the implementation of those great commitments and the strategic moves of the European Commission. But now let me turn to our next speaker, who is serving on the committee of the CRPD for a few years already. And we have a privilege of having him with us to bring a little bit more of the highlights of this why the CRPD is so important for us and why we should really pay attention to this work of the United Nations, work at the level of the United Nations, while we're working at the regional level. So let me invite Laszlo Lovashi to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you for your kind invitation. It is a great honor for me to take part in this very important event. So why is this UNCRPD so unique? Let me begin by referring to the fact that this December, the world will celebrate the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the UNCRPD. So as a former UNCRPD expert, let me also express my sincere gratitude for everyone who worked with the convention since more than 180 countries have ratified it so far. Therefore, in a way, the UNCRPD is not only a very, if not the most popular, but also the first human rights treaty in the 21st century. And I believe that this convention has an even more important aspect: technology. And it means that the convention is the first human rights treaty dealing with technology in terms of human rights. As you may already know, the UNCRPD convention itself supports that more attention should be paid to innovations, inventions, and research. If you happen to look at the Article 4 General Obligation, point F in particular, I'm fully convinced that you cannot overestimate this impact, since we are beginning to realize that entirely new solutions are coming out that no one could ever have dreamed of, even 5 years ago. It is evident that technology and science have been developing at a previously unprecedented speed and seemingly without any obstacle. Practically, it looks as if there are no limits on the horizon at all in the next decades to come. But our utmost responsibility in this field is also extremely outstanding. Talking about whether there is a kind of evolving concept of disability in terms of application of the convention. Well, absolutely. First, everyone can realize and recognize the evolution as well as importance of wearable devices, for example, hearing aids and even exoskeletons included. I think in this topic, accessible health data and services will be extremely crucial and also fundamental in terms of the quality of health services as well as the improvement of the quality of public health care. Second, the evolution of artificial intelligence-related services, applications, and products are going to be incredibly useful not only for persons with limited mobility and or multiple disabilities, but also for instance, the blind, the hearing impaired, as well as persons with mental disabilities and autism in the long run. I can even imagine virtual assistants and avatars in the capacity of helping people in limited decision-making situations, which will create an entirely new momentum in modern society. Not to mention the possibility of early recognition and tailored intervention services for disabled children at home. 3, the evolution of robotics will also change everything that we believe in when it comes to social changes. Independent living and inclusive education will also have an entirely different approach when it comes to humanoid robots and smart toys, as well as robot caregivers at home. I think COVID-19 has also accelerated the application of these technologies in the long run, and hopefully the better and more accessible solution will come much sooner as anticipated earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. This gives us quite good understanding of how we should position our work in the future. in particular for the institutions like the specialized agencies of the United Nations, like the ITU, dealing with the standards, but also with the policies and strategies. It's essential to make sure that there is the clear link between these outcomes of the convention and this what we are doing on a daily basis, implementing digital accessibility. But having said that, let me turn back to Roxana, and I would like to ask you, how is ITU contributing to the implementation, in fact, of the CRPD and in the new created United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Yaroslav. As stressed this morning by our BDT director and by yourself, actually, ITU is fully engaged to support all countries in their efforts toward achieving ICT accessibility implementation globally. And this commitment is also reflected by the member states in the ITU strategic goal number 2, which is inclusiveness, and its related target 2.9 that was already mentioned, which call on union's members to ensure that by 2023, enabling environments ensuring accessible telecommunication ICT should be established in all countries. And that means in less than 3 years. So with this in mind, and as mentioned by our previous speaker, Mr. Lazo Lovasi, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, which is a legally binding international human rights treaty, addresses the rights of people with disabilities through a total of 50 articles that encompasses all aspects of life. While only 2 articles, the Article 9 and the Article 3, particularly refers to ICT, there is a total consensus that ICT are key in improving the opportunities for persons with disabilities to lead an independent life and be valuable facilitators in the implementation of all articles of the Convention to ensure this full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms of persons with disabilities. So this convention is signed by almost all countries in the world. We know that now we have, I think in February was the last update with 182 countries. And I let you do the math. What does it mean over 193 countries? So it's actually, this makes us hear loud and clear the common global voice that call for an inclusive world. So in this context, and willing to lead by example, ITU, and in line with the global requirements established by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy that you just mentioned, ITU works closely with all our members, member states and sector members, to raise awareness on the need to implement accessibility, to mainstream accessibility in the development of international telecommunication ICT policies, strategies, and standards. And more particularly, our work focuses on developing and providing relevant and, we hope, valuable resources, including toolkits, reports, and training to support our member states, but also all stakeholders involved in their efforts to implement ICT accessibility globally. Actually, I take this opportunity to invite you all to participate in our knowledge development session that will be offered by this regional event on Thursday from 10 o'clock. And while for this time we will not be able to deliver this training session face-to-face as we used to do, I promise you all that will be a very informative session regardless your respective area of work and expertise, and I invite you all to attend. Now, with regard to the second part of your question, on the work within the UN, among these activities, among other, I would like to mention in particular our work with WHO in the work stream on which ITU lead the development of terms of reference for accessibility guidelines for telehealth and e-health application, which are now in work for development of a joint global standard for accessibility of telehealth services. What does it prove, actually? It proves that while some sister agencies and all of us, we really try to do good and to develop telehealth services and application to everyone. If we don't consider the accessibility features, we realize later on that these are not accessible for everyone. And then we have to turn back and readjust these requirements. Also, another key partner, which is for our international level organization, ILO, we are now developing a project with them that target to provide guidelines and develop the capacity of governments and also UN agencies and other interested partners, while contributing to identify best practices to be considered in the design and development of accessible online job application and recruitment systems. We really want to ensure that all these online applications are accessible to everyone, which is not the case. And in particular, in this time of COVID, we all observe, which is a trend on the labor part and the teleworking, how important became in this, I would say, last years and perhaps will be for the next years. So this project is an important collaboration aligned with the commitments made in the framework of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy to achieve sustainable and transformative progress on disability inclusion by ensuring the inclusion of persons with disabilities in all areas of UN work, and to try to consider all actions that can actually impact also behavior with regards to governments and private sector. I hope I respond to your requirements, but I can continue on this because it's a subject that I think it's very important for all of us to understand how to mainstream this in different areas of our activities, as mentioned, while by providing accessibility application or job opportunities or education. This is also a topic that we look forward to work with our partners and to ensure that accessible education is also ensured globally.
Thank you very much, Roxana, and thank you very much for mentioning the partnerships, because accessibility cannot be done by one institution.
Absolutely.
It requires the solid partnership with the good understanding of the needs of the end user. So that's why congratulations to this. But let me now turn to our colleagues from the European Commission, and let's take a look at the European Accessibility Act and what is happening with this act. So Ima, would you be able to elaborate on that? Just checking if Ima is connected with us.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, good. Technology is not leaving us completely alone. Okay, so yes, the Accessibility Act. Yes, I would really like to share with you where we are now in the developments related to the Act. Just to refresh your memories, the Accessibility Act will have to be transposed into national legislation next year. So the efforts that we are doing now is to support, the focus is to support the member states so that when in June 22 they have the laws, the regulations, the administrative provisions to comply with the directive being adopting and published, because it's very important, they have to be published, they can they do so in a correct, coherent, and ambitious way. We are really trying to facilitate that. To that end, what we are doing, we are having an informal group of member states representatives that are responsible at national level for the implementation, for the transposition of the directive. We meet frequently, and what we also do is to clarify, try to have a common understanding in a very informal way on the provisions of the directive. Let me clarify that the European Commission does not interpret EU law. The interpretation of the law is left to the court. Nevertheless, we facilitate and work together to better understand the content of the directive. This is one thing that we are doing on the legal side, and on the practical side also, we are now working on the adoption of or the preparation, I would say first, the preparation of a standardization mandate. A mandate that it is required by Article 15 of the directive that says that in accordance with the regulation, the European regulation on standardization, we have to request one or more standardization mandates to draft harmonized standards. Harmonized standards provide presumption of conformity with the requirements of the directive, and we have to do so by prepare a draft for products, the accessibility of products, by June this year. So we are working on that, and soon we're going to start the work of consultation. We are reaching out to stakeholders, to the European standardization organizations, but also to economic operators that have to comply with the directive, as well as users that are affected by the provisions in the directive, because we would really like to set up a good working environment in order to adopt this mandate that contains provisions that would lead to a good result. So in parallel, what we are also doing, as you have seen, as I have said in my previous question, is to start working for setting up this resource center that would help with issues, as I said, like training, better understanding, sharing of good practices. We need really to make sure that all the potential of this act, so not only its formal obligations, but all the potential that it has is really realized for the benefit of Europe. So this is where we are in the act. We are also reflecting on what to do and how to address services. And in the area of ICT, it's difficult to separate products from services. So the directive leaves the freedom to do a standardization mandate in relation to services, and we are reflecting on that. And if you are interested to participate, please reach out to your national standardization organizations and to the European ones, because it's really important that there is a good and a wealth of representation of all the stakeholders through the different governance bodies set up by standardization. By the way, tomorrow we will have a specific session on standardization. For the rest, we continue to discuss with the member states, and I hope that next year we will be able to have successful transpositions in all the member states. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ima, for drawing attention to this. Indeed, the technical standardization is extremely important for the accessibility and to ensure that we can have the solutions which are working everywhere. Talking about everywhere, let me come back to our distinguished colleague, whom I would like to invite to talk about CRPD and special references to the ICTs in this convention. And maybe if you might also tell us what are the main challenges to the person with disabilities in terms of the modern technologies which are captured in this process.
Thank you. Thank you again. So we have a number of concrete references, and the committee itself has also developed its jurisprudence and understanding of the importance of the ICT via so-called general comments. According to Article 9 of the CRPD, technology design should take into account accessibility and usability features in all point system programs. Therefore, this specific article, Article 9, must be considered as the backbone of the convention. Apart from Article 9, Article 2 describes reasonable accommodation. It's a very important notion of the convention. In the case of information and communication technology, since many accessibility and assistive solutions are available and already implemented, it follows that the CRPD dispositions on reasonable accommodation shall be applied as many cases as possible. In addition to that, as I already mentioned, the committee has also developed two important general comments in this field. General comment number 2 on Article 9, accessibility, adopted in 2014, and general comment number 4 on Article 24, right to inclusive education, adopted 5 years ago in particular. I personally recommend these general comments for further consideration. Furthermore, we can identify additional requirements in terms of accessibility when it comes to Article 21, dealing with the deliverance of essential services in the field of access to information, not to mention voting procedures via electric kiosk, as you can look at Article 29. To sum up, if you look for more relevant areas, you can also consider the following topics in terms of covering existing articles: non-discrimination in general, e-government, media and internet, television, private sector services, issues of liberty and security, emergency services in particular, culture and leisure. So it practically means almost everything. That is why the convention is so unique. There are no areas of life without some or even improving levels of ICT connection and services. And regarding what the main challenges to persons with disabilities in terms of modern technologies, well, while these before mentioned tools are going to be everyday issue on experience, we also have to scrutinize certain aspects like privacy, interoperability, affordability. Otherwise, persons with disabilities could be left out in the long run. At this point, in terms of interoperability and conformity, let's say conformity, we have to highlight that the party indeed have obligation to make sure all customers can have access in one way or another to those products and services without even, for example, interference problems. Was the most important message of the convention when it comes to the modern technologies. Let me be very clear. The convention is about dignity, diversity, and human rights. As the convention clearly states, we have to make more efforts in terms of research and innovation. However, as I always express again, at the same time, we also have to change the value of freedom, competition, and diversity in technological development in order to find out, try, experience, and finally establish services on the grounds of reasonableness and fairness. Why? Because evolution of technology also serves the purpose of reasonably providing the very different needs of all very diverse humanity. there is no one size fits all. We are talking about hundreds of millions, if not 1 billion persons with disabilities all around the world. It follows that we must not shut the door on new things, even unusual ICT solutions and innovations. It means that we must curb innovation, freedom, and more importantly, motivation in science. However, science and technology should serve the people themselves. We cannot forget those with special, even extreme needs either. That problem could be yours at one fell swoop right after an accident, for example. What's more, and I'm fully convinced that in the future, everybody might be somehow disabled in one way or another in comparison to AI-enhanced software and services. In this way, we are talking about a kind of evolution of disability itself, too. Just to remember, you shouldn't worry about the future, since in contrast to actual fearmongers, humanity has always been progressing and was able to improve its standard of living and circumstances. Finally, the UN Convention is not about maintaining a right to remain disabled, but about ensuring choices and chances. Our job today is to seize the opportunity to learn more about what the future has to offer. I wish you a very fruitful discussing and mutual learning and better understanding of the reachable promises and possible risks of evolving ICT solutions to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this answer. And dear ladies and gentlemen, in fact, we are arriving to the end of our session, but I have still one question from the audience, from Jane. Thank you very much for a question, which I would not like to close this session without answering. And maybe let's treat this as the concluding question to all our panelists. So which is, in your view, the key element or consideration within the ICTs to ensure the inclusiveness of all people, regardless their age, gender, and ability in the Europe region and globally? So I will start with Roxana, and please be short of 1 to 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Yaroslav. So thank you for this question. Definitely, I think it's not accessibility. However, if I have to jointly build with all of you here together an accessible digital world, I would say that this accessibility should be built on other two very important pillars. First is infrastructure access. So to be able to access further services of internet. Then it's affordability. So if we have the plug, but we don't have the possibility to pay the internet service, access is not actually useful. And if we have internet access and we can pay the service, but we cannot pay the device that will help us to access the information, again, this is not helpful. And based on these two first pillars in my pyramid towards achieving this digital world, accessibility is fundamental. So accessibility going through accessible device. So in order to be able to access the information that the digital information that the device is providing, so to have embedded accessibility features. Also at the government level to ensure that policy and regulatory measures are in place in order for us all to be able to benefit from in all circumstances and from all platforms, TV, websites, and so on. And this is the case in Europe now. And also very important under accessibility, appropriation and digital skills. So even if we do have the internet access, we have the money to pay the device, and the device is accessible. If we don't know how to use it, we still are not included. So with this in mind, I hope we can all put our efforts and build an inclusive digital world.
Great, thank you very much for this. And I'm moving now to European Commission. Immaculada, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, I cannot agree more with Roxana. I think she raised very important points to which I fully agree. I would like to add a couple of more points to that list of elements that are necessary to ensure this inclusive technologies and inclusive ICT digital solutions for all. We need to work also on awareness. I mean, people need to know, first of all, that the technology is accessible, but also those making the technologies need to know that they have to make it. And for that, I think that having a clear legal and policy framework, that it is specific enough to say what needs to be done in order to achieve accessible results, leaving, of course, a freedom for implementation, but being very specific as to the aims of what to achieve is essential. I would also like to highlight the skills and competencies, at both sides, from the users to be able to use the technology, the accessibility features of the technology, but also from the professionals, the ICT professionals, the digital professions, to make sure that they know how to implement accessibility. And finally, I think we need to have strong enforcement mechanisms, so that when there are problems, and there will be problems, because accessibility is not just a one-off, it's not something static. You need really to pay attention to it constantly. When digital services change, they need to be continue to be taken into account. So we need a strong enforcement framework that would aim to remedy those breaches, those problems that remain, because without corrective measures, we would not be able to cope with this dynamic aspect of accessibility in the technologies. So these are issues that add on to what Rosanna has said. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for this. So point about the enforcement, very well noted. And now let me turn for the final word to Laszlo Lovashi.
Thank you. From the second half of the 20th century onwards, thanks to the technological advances, not only passive diagnostic and medical devices, but also increasingly advanced ITC monitoring equipment improved the quality of health service, and invasive devices implanted in the human body, pacemakers, cochlear implants, for example, worn on the body, have begun to spread. The most important aspect of ICT in the future is about the digitization of health data, the creation of algorithms based on increased artificial intelligence, contributing to the toolbox of health diagnostics as well as to a wider use and application of everyday practical tools in an accessible way. At the same time, it means that the so-called renaissance of medical rehabilitation will come, based on ICT-based technology. Mind-controlled artificial body parts have been developed that make the artificial parts feelable by their owners. It follows that this kind of rehabilitation must mean an obligation of forced adoption for persons with disabilities, but rather that more people will be provided with options and access to a much more efficient support and opportunities based on smart and ICT technology, people with disabilities included. As I mentioned before, diversity is the key element of this approach. More innovation can be achieved in a more diverse circumstances. As you can see, finding solutions go to the bottom of deep ocean or to the moon. The future is arrived. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll take this as the concluding statement of this session. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much also to those who were brave to ask the question, the first question of this accessible forum. Please use this function of the platform. interact and ask the questions also to the experts being with us. We learned a lot during this session. We invite you still to refer also to the report which we have presented at the beginning, where you will have also the background information of many things which we addressed during this session. But not prolonging, one more time, thank you very much to all speakers for being with us. And it's my great pleasure and honor, before breaking for the break, to introduce the video contribution from Miss Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes, Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General on Digital Disability and Accessibility. And I would like to request for playing the video. And after playing the video, we will break for a break and we'll come back together back at 12 o'clock. So please, video. And from my side, I'm saying already, thank you.
Accessibility, Pillar and Bridge, for the exercise of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, United Nations. Persons with disabilities represent around 15% of the world's population, which is equivalent to more than 1 billion persons, who face several barriers to their full and effective inclusion in society. Persons with disabilities have the right to be autonomous, to live independently, and to be included in the community. Therefore, we must promote universal accessibility as a human right, so that our cities are inclusive, safe, resilient, progressing towards sustainable development, leaving no one behind. 2030 Agenda, United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, number 11. To improve accessibility in both urban and rural areas, we must apply principles, guidelines, and standards on universal design in all facilities and services open to the public or for public use, including the removal of obstacles and barriers. Implement or improve accessibility in physical spaces, such as buildings, public roads, transportation, schools, housing, hospitals or medical facilities, workplaces, stadiums, cultural centers, recreation and sports, among others. Promote access to information and communication services, including those needed in situations of emergency. Promote access and use for persons with disabilities to new information and communication technologies and systems, including the internet. Buildings and other facilities must include accessible signage. Different forms of personalized assistance, such as guides, readers, and professional sign language interpreters, should be offered to facilitate accessibility to buildings and other facilities open to the public. Provide training, including training in universal design and accessibility to all public and private institutions that provide services to the public as well as to the community. We all must be aware that we live in diverse, dynamic, and interactive societies, and that the commitment of governments, including local governments and municipalities, is essential to ensure that accessibility is a fundamental pillar in all cities, creating a bridge so that all persons can enjoy all their human rights and fundamental freedoms. Let's promote accessibility as a commitment for society as a whole. produced by the Special Envoy of the United Nations Secretary General on Disability and Accessibility, Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes. Year 2020.
Thank you very much for playing the video. And now, dear colleagues, we'll have a break of 2-3 minutes before we are starting the next session. So please be patient and use the time as needed. Thank you very much. I would like to request for putting the image. Thank you. Dear ladies and gentlemen, and this will be around the time to start the second session of the Accessible Europe, and it's my great pleasure to invite to take the floor Mr. Dusan Kaf, the ITU consultant of the International Telecommunications Union, who will be moderating this session, but also who was instrumental in elaboration of the regional assessment. Dr. Kaf, I'm handing over to you the floor.
Thank you, Yaroslav. Just a second. Yeah, dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to participate in this conference and moderate the session on the regional review of enabling environments, ensuring accessible telecommunications and ICTs for persons with disabilities in the Europe region. My name is Dusan Kaf. I lead digital accessibility policy and research programs and a digital transformation platform that connects and helps stakeholders in creating a more inclusive digital society. I'm also an ITU digital accessibility consultant, as Yaroslav already mentioned. Let me now introduce our panelists. First, Mr. Bengt Mölrit, a senior analyst at the Swedish Post and Telecom Agency, here representing BEREC, the body of European regulators for electronic communications. He's also a designated chair for the Working Party on Communications Infrastructure and Service Policy at the OECD. Mr. Mark Whitley, who is the Executive Director of the European Union of the Deaf. Mark is also active at the World Federation of the Deaf and in various accessibility projects and initiatives. Ms. Polona Blaznik is an expert in information society and digital public service design. She is also a head of the Information Society Office at the Ministry of Public Administration of Slovenia. And finally, Mr. Thet Brevin, Director of Strategic Alliances at T-Mobile. He comes from industry, but has also extensive experience in digital accessibility in the education sector and in non-governmental organizations. What are we going to speak about in this session? Last year, ITU carried out a regional review to assess how accessible information and communications are in the Europe region. Yaroslav has already mentioned some of the findings. In 46 countries, we investigated their commitments to ICT accessibility and their capacity to meet those commitments. Over 100 indicators were used to assess ICT accessibility in the whole region. We covered the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the 4 EU directives forming the EU accessibility framework that covers websites of public bodies, audiovisual media services, electronic communications, and products and services. We also identified a plethora of good practices in ICT accessibility from all over the region. The ITU assessment provides a comprehensive overview of accessibility requirements, good practices and recommendations for ITU member states and stakeholders. There is no doubt, we found out that Europe is, and confirmed that Europe is among global leaders in ICT accessibility. However, with its multidimensional diversity, Europe has developed a distinctive approach based on regulatory intervention and multi-stakeholder cooperation. These processes may not always be efficient, but after all, they are effective. Several countries adopted advanced ICT accessibility requirements far ahead of the adoption of the EU accessibility framework. Overall, Europe is doing fine, but there are still challenges ahead of us. Let me just briefly mention some of key findings. 41 of 46 countries have adopted or plan to adopt web accessibility laws or statutory requirements. Around half of the countries require the public service media organizations to provide subtitles and signing, including live subtitles and signing. Around 1/3 of the countries regulate specific aspects of accessibility requirements for products and services, as included in the European Accessibility Act. Well, and in electronic communications, we focus on broadband internet access, access to emergency services, and on relay and total conversation services. Here we identified two critical areas. These two areas are equivalent access to emergency services and availability of total conversation services. So now let's hear the perspectives of our panelists. First, Mr. Bengt Møllerit. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that electronic communications products and services are crucial for persons with disabilities to access information and communications on an equal basis and without discrimination. What are BEREC and NRAs doing to overcome discrimination and improve the quality of service and quality of experience for persons with disabilities? Bengt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kaff, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for inviting BEREC and me to this event today. So I will share with you some examples from BEREC. So the BEREC is the organization that unites all the regulators for electronic communication in Europe and together with the European Commission. So what I will do, I will share, try to share the screen with the presentation. So I will share that in the presentation mode, and this specifically is from the end user, which is a working group within the OECD, within the BEREC, and I'm also involved in OECD. So, but this in this case, this is BEREC here, and what we have done during the last year. In the joint effort together with the OECD, we organized an international workshop. We became webinars on quality of service and quality of experience, just to investigate the status of quality of service and quality of experience, how the users perceive this, and also to identify the gaps, you can say, and issues related to accessibility. And the other work that is ongoing is a study that BEREC has commissioned for a company, PPMI, from Lithuania. And they have done quite an extensive consumer study on the behavior of digital platform for communication. And in that study, the specific analysis of to what extent accessibility, if these platforms that is so widely used today, and the level of accessibility, to what degree they comply with the current regulation. And what could be said in short, it is a lot of work remains to be done, basically, to provide accessibility for everyone. But in the same time, it is complex to compare, and I will share with you some thoughts on that. And as I said, the issue of quality of service and quality of experience is on the agenda. And the quality of service is, it is a technical aspect in network, but it is also a way to measure how networks are perceiving, how services are transmitted. So BEREC is doing some work on this area. And also due to the pandemic, the initial workshop was then turned into webinars. And we have the end user working group, which I represent in this case here, but the co-chairs were unable to participate in this conference today. So any question could be forwarded to them. And what the end user group is doing, working on guidelines defining quality of service parameters and measurements in order to comply with the existing regulation, and also guide the regulatory authorities within Europe to provide the services so they comply with the quality aspects. And then we also have our colleagues working with the open internet, which is also various quality parameter and measurement regarding quality of service. And this is also linked to the issue of net neutrality, enabling consumers and users to have perceiving services regardless of their source, and they are not sorted or prioritized. If you look at quality of service and quality experience, what we underscored during the webinars was really two countries that are showing very good examples, ICEP in France and Korea. Is this question of improving services and doing measurement on how these network, what they perform, and the quality aspects of them. And Korea, although maybe you think that Korea is ahead of Europe and they have very advanced technologies with 5G, etc., they are also working consistently to improve accessibility, but also to measure the different parameters of the networks. And they are very advanced, but still they want to improve and be better. And what was experienced and shared at the network, accessibility and how to harness communication technologies for people with disabilities with appropriate quality of service levels. And it is certainly a question here that the operators that provide services and networks, and also the platform and other involved players, has a lot to do up until 2025 in order to comply with the existing regulation. We were also examples of the e-health and significance of quality of service, which is, for example, an organization, VDTM, and a sector organization in the Netherlands, working for healthcare and home care services, and how this is clearly underscoring the importance of e-health solutions growing, and really for asking, and this has been also underscored now during the pandemic and the COVID crisis. And this is also certainly a question of reliability and network, how these network cope and the services, and how they could address weakness and when the network breakdowns. And this organization was an example, working together with colleagues in France, how they need to push operators to provide services and also to address weaknesses in networks. And from the United States, the issue of improving quality of efficiency of video relay services, where this is a right for anyone to have accessibility. So what FCC is doing, the regulatory authority in the United States, they implement and regulate various types of telecommunications service, relay service programs, which is ensure that video relay services calls are functional, equivalent to telephone calls, and that anybody that have disabilities could get support in order to be able to communicate. And this could be done through special support persons if they're not able to dial themselves, but this is clear a function which provides services making it possible for anybody to communicate, despite whatever disabilities they have. BEREC has published a report on the findings from the workshops, and they are also available from YouTube in a video format. And then we have the consumer behaviors, as I said, on the study on the digital platforms. And the digital platforms today is where people are using, the consumers to a very large extent, are using this for communication services. So we have done a large study on roughly 12,000 consumers have been interviewed over by web panels. And this study will be published later on this spring after going through all the different final steps here in finalization. And we have a number of guidelines that's been reviewed within the BEREC that addressing different aspects of operability, both on real text and voice communication and video communication, which is work underway. And this was in short, highlighting some aspects from the BEREC working part on end users, which is striving to work in order to overcome shortages in networks, to improve the quality and also accessibility of the electronic communication services. And as I said, the platform issue study will be published later, where, as I said, this research and investigation to where we have the studies examining the level of how these platforms are really living up to the standards in the existing regulation, and said that there is a lot of work to be done there. Thank you very much, and over to Chair, Mr. Chair, please.
Okay, thank you, Bengt. Let us now move to our next panelist, Mark Whitley. Well, Bengt mentions the key areas that BEREC is working on, but from the perspective of users, I think Mark is the right person to speak about this perspective. In the regional ICT accessibility assessment, we stress the importance of equivalent access to emergency communications. Emergency services should be available to persons with disabilities, not only in their respective countries, but also while roaming abroad. When these end users are not able to place a call to 112, they have to rely on nationally fragmented solutions. Mark, can you tell us how to implement a harmonized single European emergency number 112 and how to ensure equivalent access to emergency services? Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I just check that the interpreter's audio can be heard? Do we have sound? Lovely, thank you. So thank you very much for the invitation to join at this very important event on the subject of accessibility. Now, accessibility is at the heart of what we do. But first of all, I would like to just take a moment and just explain who the EUD are and what we do. We're an NGO organization, and we work with national associations of the deaf around Europe. So we have 31 National Association deaf members, but we are the only organization representing deaf sign language users around Europe at the European level. So we take part at EU level dialogues with various institutions and official personnel. We are a full member of the EDF, the European Disability Forum, who are with us today, and also WFD, the World Federation for the Deaf, and the Council of Europe, COE. So with that in mind, EUD advocates on the issue of accessibility and how access can be transposed into law. What we do is we monitor and support national associations of the deaf so that they can lobby their governments on harmonization and the adoption of legislation. So for example, what's stipulated in the EEA and the Electronic Communication Code, making sure that the end user is considered. So for example, with the telephone communication emergency services, how that can be made accessible. I'll talk about different parts of our work streams. The first is the European Accessibility Act, which recently EMA from the European Commission has already outlined and explained. What we bring to this discourse is our work with the EDF, the experience that deaf people have, and their specific issues in terms of what access means to them. And also our role is to raise awareness within the deaf community about the work that is happening at EU level on the various acts and directives that are being developed. We also support national associations of the deaf about how different parts of the directives can be transposed into legislation. So we've been working on the EAA and the Electronic Communication Code. The EUD has been advocating on a number of priorities. For example, the EECC, the European Electronic Communication Code. We have been following this legislative procedure since 2016. In 2017, we submitted a number of amendments to Article 102, specifically on access to emergency services. EDF put forward some amendments and we fed back into that process to make sure that emergency services were accessible through total conversation framework. So using total conversation or third-party relay services. This is to ensure that the end user is able to access emergency services at any point, at any time of need. And making sure that deaf people have the same access as any other end user. So total conversation, what does that refer to? It's a universal design feature, which means that a deaf person can choose to speak, sign, or read whilst engaged in the telephone interaction. And this means by including those three functions, this opens the opportunity for anyone who is deaf to use their language preference to access emergency services. We have been working with European deaf associations on how to advocate and lobby on these features, providing them with the toolkit to make sure that the message is put through to their national governments. So for example, video relay services, VRS, which Beric has just mentioned, that is one example of one of our major focuses. VRS provides an important opportunity for people to access different services. Some countries already provide VRS, but on a limited basis. So with such a patchwork of provisions, how will deaf people know where and when a VRS service is accessible? So it's important that we see VRS harmonized across European states, and this includes the way that access to emergency services is made available. So let's say, for example, how will a deaf person know when they move from one European country to another, what the rules or the terms of services are for a particular VRS or a national VRS platform? It's important that deaf people have the same level of access to emergency services as anyone else, despite where they are in Europe. This could happen to you. You could find yourself in a situation where you need support. What would you do if you find that that support or that service is not available to you? So I look forward to the conversations that we have around how we make European emergency services accessible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for your interesting presentation. Now let's hear the perspective of the operator. Seth, we have heard the regulators and users' perspectives. From your perspective as a telecommunications service provider, what are the challenges to provide equivalent access to the services for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, or have a speech disability? Seth, the floor is yours.
Hello, this is Seth Bravin. I'm speaking to you through a sign language interpreter named Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mark mentioned, there are some countries in the world that have relay services. However, there are many that still do not have relay services at all. The countries that do currently have relay services experience issues with quality, such as the speed of answer, interpreter qualifications, as well as confidentiality and security. Also, another consideration is the platform accessible for people who are blind or people who are speech disabled in order to utilize it? And of course, emergency services is a very important aspect of this. It really needs to be viewed as a need and not as a luxury. Some key considerations and some key challenges that we see is the mechanism in which this type of service will be funded. Will it be funded within a universal service fund or in another one? There are several moving parts with that aspect, as well as the interoperability of different platforms, the quality of service with relay providers, the ability to call emergency services. What we've seen with the COVID pandemic is an urgency to have these types of services in place. Deaf people, people who are hard of hearing, deaf, blind, or speech disabled are even more isolated within their homes and unable to make phone calls out if there are no relay services available. Europe has passed an important milestone with passing some recent acts, which is great to see. I think some future challenges we'll see is making international relay calls. If you cross over a border into another country within Europe, within Asia, or the Americas, how are you able to make phone calls to home or to other areas? It's important that we coordinate with the government, NGOs, and the private sectors. We're seeing an international drive, especially with the UN CRPD and with the ITU's commitment to accessibility. So there is some momentum that we're seeing, and that is an exciting aspect of the provision of these types of services on an international level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Seth. So we covered now electronic communication, which are very important for persons with disabilities. But there is another important area. This is accessibility of information of public bodies. We have with us Ms. Polona Blaznik. Polona, website accessibility has gained momentum in Europe since the implementation of the Web Accessibility Directive in member states. How has accessibility of websites of public bodies in Slovenia improved in recent years? Can you tell us what are the lessons learned? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello from Ljubljana, from Slovenia. Thank you, the organizers, for inviting me to this conference. So Slovenian Ministry of Public Administration is a horizontal ministry, and we are responsible also for the development of and coordination of digital government services. We've started working on better accessibility already several years ago. First, following the guidelines of Web Content Accessibility, WCAG, to be honest, not in a very systematical way, especially because there was no systematic monitoring of implementation. Then, based on our own good practices and the practices of other countries, we prepared the guidelines for the development of digital services in public administration. And we pointed out the importance of inclusion and accessibility. What we understand is that digital services can be used by all indiscriminately and that adequate assistance is available. We also started promoting the principles of user-centric approach in designing digital services. That means we should put the user at the center and take into account his or her needs. not only when we are just planning a project, but through the entire development process, designing, testing. And already before the adoption of Web Accessibility Directive, we designed our e-government state portal in a way that is appropriate for the use by the blind, visually impaired, the deaf and hard of hearing people, people with dyslexia, and users with impaired understanding. For example, the descriptions of the administrative procedures are now accompanied to a large extent by short videos with the interpretation of the text in Slovenian Sign Language. Also, when writing text, we take care of understandable and simple text. And so you asked what are the key lessons learned, maybe to share, is that it's very important to start. I mean, designing web accessible pages demands certain skills. But it's important that we start with what we do know and then gradually learn from others who know more than us. Then when we are talking about the users that need inclusive services, we think that it's all this about getting it right. It's about getting it right and not just making quick adjustments to the web pages. And also our experience showed that while accessibility consultancy is important and can may help highlighting certain issues, but they are not real users. That's why it's so important to test the services with real users. And as a consequence, what we find out is that such web pages are at the end, more accessible and more friendly to all users, not just people with disabilities.
Thank you, Polona. Bengt, before you already mentioned the online platforms. Now, when we discuss the accessibility of the web, what are the lessons learned through the study commissioned by the BEREC on the online platforms? Can you share with us some thoughts already or some findings?
Thank you. And in order just to say a few words on the study, it will be published later on during the spring. And as I said, it is a questionnaire that for 12,000 respondents, and also in 12 countries through Europe. And what we asked the consultants was to see how the different platforms comply with the different regulation and the accessibility. And what is obvious from their study or their findings is that because the users generate also content, so this makes it complex to have the accessibility issue, or it raises different perspective, or makes it more complex, you can say. For example, users uploading content on YouTube, sending that to friends, how to safeguard that it is possible for people with some different disabilities to take care, to digest that. So in order to understand what is said. So they have walked through the different guidelines and regulation and mapped them to their various platforms. And this is specifically for communication services like Messenger, WhatsApp. So that was the perspective. And then to see to what extent these communication services provided with platform, how they comply with it. And what they said, it is not so, it's quite a negative impression to see that these companies has a lot to do in order to make it accessible for everyone. But in the same time, they're underscoring the complexity to evaluate to what extent this, because there are different factors involved here, because I said on the end user generated content, for example. So it is, I assume, challenging for a lot of people with disability to use some of these services if they don't comply. And we have also, because some of them are also depending upon software in terminals and how they present the material when these services are used. So it is a desktop work regarding the accessibility evaluation. So they have elaborated this kind of evaluation scheme when they have compared these services. So it is a little bit depressing in one way, you could say. But as I said, it is sometimes it is also quite complex to make this comparison.
Okay, thank you, Bengt. So I think now it is good to ask Polona. Polona, you come from a small language group country. What are the challenges of small language groups when it comes to accessibility online?
Yes, just what my predecessor was talking about, big platforms. Yes, concerning emerging technologies, like, for example, also artificial intelligence can help address the challenges of accessibility and bring forward the solutions we need. With the advances of the use of artificial intelligence in language technologies, we are definitely getting better solutions to improve accessibility in digital space. However, solutions that exist and are developed by big tech companies and offered by online platforms are not adopted to users from small countries due to small market linguistic barriers. So small countries, as is the case also in Slovenia, have to take care of themselves, get their own resources and knowledge. And Slovenia has many years of experience in the development of digital language resources and technologies. And these activities have been supported by different measures by the government. And right now there is a big project going on. And as a result, we will get more tools for text and speech recognition available as open source. So we believe also this experience will be improved. On the other hand, we are still aware that the support of the government will be necessary also in the future. For example, that's in our national program for artificial intelligence. There is a special attention dedicated to promoting the use of artificial intelligence technologies in the development of language technologies. So yes, there is a difference between being from a big country or English-speaking country than from a small country that is really left to itself to improve the capabilities of own citizens.
Okay, thank you. Mark, before you mentioned the implementation of emergency services and video relay services, you already mentioned some of the challenges, but how should member states implement total conversation services? Should they implement them through implementation of the Electronic Communications Code or wait for the European Accessibility Act? What are your recommendations?
Okay. So we're very excited about the European Accessibility Act. And what it states is that each member state has 5 years to change their laws so that it's in line with the European Accessibility Act, and so that services like 112 are accessible. And And so 112 must be made accessible within 5 years. So this means we've got a lot of work ahead of us. How we make 112 accessible across Europe. And there are challenges. So if a national country, it's their responsibility to make sure that their own competencies are in place. They must then campaign for a harmonized service across Europe. So for example, VRS services should be made available across borders. The issue is with some countries, it's easier to bring those changes. So let's say, for example, one country, they've got one point of service for emergency services, and that covers the whole of the country. That can then be made accessible for anyone, regardless of where they are across Europe. But in other countries, VRS is provided on a regional basis. So let's take Germany as an example. How are we going to make a unified service when it's managed by different providers? And that can become problematic. Finding ways to harmonize that system. So in terms of 112, we have a lot of work ahead of us in supporting different member states in bringing about those changes within the time frame that's set by the legislation. We don't have any time to waste. And so this is an opportunity for us to make sure that there is 112 is made fully accessible. We are now in 2021. What I find unbelievable is, why are we still campaigning on these issues? These problems should have been resolved long ago. Even though we are still some way off, we now have legislation supporting our work and getting the message out there so that positive change can happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, that's a question. Why are we still campaigning? So perhaps Seth has the answer. Seth, how is T-Mobile committed to provide products and services that are accessible for all, especially for persons with disabilities?
This is Seth. You know, T-Mobile has a long history in the relay service industry. We've been in the business for more than 30 years, and the implementation of relay services has provided a lot of lessons learned and some best practices. We have different versions of relay services that we provide. We provide text service, video relay service, captioned telephones, and speech-to-speech service, just to highlight a few. We've learned over the years that every individual has their own unique preference of a service they want. For myself, for example, I use both text relay service and video relay service, where another deaf or hard of hearing person might have a different preference. Some examples of some best practices. We have a large number of people with disabilities that work in our business unit. So it really helps us to understand the end user's needs, their challenges, and how we can best improve those services for people with disabilities based on their participation in our workplace. Also, relay services provide a life-transforming experience for people with disabilities to help them find gainful employment and grow in the workplace. We have employee retention and people who can climb the corporate ladder based on the ability to access these types of services. We believe it's important to build an ecosystem on an international, national, and regional level, to build relationships and partnerships with NGOs as well as government entities. We also proactively reach out to end users and disability organizations to have a better understanding of what their needs are and what challenges they face. We participate in webinars and conferences as well. For example, before the pandemic, in July of 2018, I attended the World Federation of the Deaf conference that was in Paris. It was a wonderful opportunity to meet deaf and hard of hearing people and deaf-blind people from all over the world to see what challenges they face and how these services could be provided. One quick study is in New Zealand. We were providing relay services in New Zealand for 15 years, working closely with a nonprofit organization locally and the government to help build an ecosystem that allowed people to thrive. Looking ahead into the future, T-Mobile is very committed to and recognizes that our work in this area is not complete. We are always looking at developing new technology and new services that can be provided and help build those pieces of the ecosystem. For example, including partnerships with universities in addition to NGOs and government organizations.
Okay, thank you, Seth. So we covered now some of the topics that we covered with our assessment. Well, unfortunately, the session is limited, so we cannot go on with in more details. But before we wrap up the session, we have two questions. They are both directed. Barrick. The first one is on quality of services measures in networks. So, Bengt, could you have a look here? How do you approach the key network performance metrics, and are networks aware and willing to deliver a sufficient end-user experience? How do you think this can be reinforced?
Is this a question from Mari Rua in Georgia, or?
Oh, this is from Sergio Bello.
Okay. Barrick has published a number of guidelines when it comes to quality of service measurement, which is incorporating various standards, and these guidelines is then in order to give instructions or guidance, you can say, for the national the NRAs, the national regulatory authorities out through Europe. And what they can do then is to use these guidelines in order to evaluate to what extent the networks in the respective countries are fulfilling these guidelines. But what could be said is that today the communication networks are quite advanced. So in that respect, quality of service measures are already implicit or integrated into the networks. But as I gave two examples of France and Korea, where they do extensive work on measurement, evaluating, and publishing what these networks are, how they are performing, and what really the consumers are getting when they're buying the services. So these are two lead examples, and in my own country, PTS is not doing this, which they should, in order to help consumers make more informed choices, and also to really to improve competition, and also to stimulate more investment. I think these networks, they has to be evaluated externally. So you can say that guidelines is one part, and then implementing of the guidelines is second, and the third is then when the NRAs taken a very active part in, together with various partners, it could be, or by themselves, to really measure and publish and make it public in order to really to make it aware of how the networks are performing. And this could also be done in conjunction with various quality assurance, quality of service parameters, and also to comply with various rules and regulations as being discussed here. So some work is done, but I would say it could be more work could be done, and also has been referred to the code previously, which also giving the mandate to national regulatory authorities to pursue a lot of work around this quality of service to improve networks and make it more available.
Okay, thank you, Bengt. So the second question is very broad. We cannot answer all such questions, but perhaps we could have a question here for Seth. First, Seth, how is a telecom operator providing affordability of universal services in your case? Do you have any measures, you receive money from the Universal Service Fund, or any other measures are there?
That is a very good question, and there are several different models that are in place on an international level. One approach is to use a universal service fund where each citizen contributes a small amount to that fund. Having a centralized fund is something that can be regulated by the federal government in its provision to ensure quality of service and also to ensure the sustainability of that service as well. It's a very complex system. I can talk more to individual questions that people have asked one-on-one. Feel free to contact me and I can explain a bit more in depth.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the second part of the question here is for Bengt. What is the minimum set of services provided in the scope of the universal service to persons with disabilities? Can you answer this, Bengt?
I don't know if I can answer. I can say like this. I mean, firstly, we have access to internet. That this is, I mean, it's always today a human right to have access, and then this like functional access. And you can say, according to the law, I mean, for example, in my country, that anybody should have the possibility, should have the right to have access to basic communication services, which implies then to overbridge any kind of inabilities in the system to help the user, basically. And as I said, these different guidelines that also BEREC has published is really to pinpoint compliance with the current regulation. But I cannot be more specific on that, and what I can refer to the co-chairs on the working party within the end user within BEREC.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I also suggest that they look into the electronic communications code, and they can find the services listed there. So it is time to wrap up the session. So we still have 3-4 minutes. So Bengt, Mark, Polona, and Seth, what are your key messages from the session? So starting with Polona.
Thank you. Well, we all want to live in a world where every single person feels included and can benefit fully from digital opportunities. Since it's likely that pandemic will have a lasting impact on access to different services and opportunities like remote working, schooling, socializing, there is a collective responsibility for organizations which work to challenge the digital inclusion gap in a way that it creates a long-term change, not just a quick fix. And the responsibility to address these challenges cannot fall just to one group. Private and public organizations need to work with governments to create a global framework of cooperation to close the digital gap.
Okay, thank you. Bengt?
Thank you very much, and also thank you for the invitation to be part of this this conference. And I said that accessibility for everyone, I mean, regardless who you are and what where you are and who you are and what your abilities are, is a key factor for any country today with the digitalization, meaning that, I mean, our life is a combination of the physical and cyber world. That is the society that we have to live, and then the technology has to be accessible for all, but it will not come without putting pressure on all involved players and actors. And as I said, the quality of service, quality of experience has to be measured and put in context. And also these platform services, as I said, it is complex to evaluate because there's so many players involved, and our users were also generating content. So this is on the agenda, and I said the report that Berk will publish could feed into a continued policy discussion on these important items that we have discussed here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Bengt. Well, I also have to mention that during our assessment, we also studied the BEREC documents. So let's move on to Seth. What is your key message, Seth?
First of all, I want to say thank you, and my hats are off to the ITU. You play a very important role with publishing the communication guidelines for relay services. So that is an important tool for countries who do not yet have services and those who do. Key performance indicators are going to be focused on, and that is an important way for us to make sure that regulations and quality of service is in compliance for everyone.
Okay, thank you, Seth. And Mark, what is your key message?
I would also like to offer my thanks as you know, our population is becoming older and older, so we need to make sure that we work for everyone in society and accessibility for all. It's a very effective concept, making sure that no one is left behind. It's not an easy task ahead of us, but it is important that we put these measures in place now, and that will help us plan for the future in achieving accessibility for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, with these key messages, we have come to the end of our panel. I would like to thank you to Bengt, Mark, Polona, and Seth for your valuable discussions and for sharing your thoughts with us. And I would also like to thank to the interpreters and technicians who made this session possible with spotting us and taking care of everything. Let us now move to the special video message session.
Good morning all. We would like to begin by thanking the kind invitation to be here with you today and address a few words sharing the vision of Portugal on this so interesting and actual topic. The pandemic crisis that the world is facing today has proved that digital inclusion is no more a long-term vision, but it's a matter of urgency. Governments have to act to make sure we don't let no one behind. As of Portugal, we are working in increasing the percentage of population that has access to high connectivity, and also that economical vulnerabilities are not a barrier to certain segments of our families. The launch of 5G, with its associated coverage obligations, will play a relevant role in increasing the reach of internet, especially in our low-density areas. The social internet tariff, that is planned to be in the market before summer will enable the most economical fragile segments of our society to access, in most cases for the first time, a proper internet service. We all know that for these families, this internet access will be a major promoter of inclusion. Access to education, information, culture, and entertainment, facilitated communication, and at the end, enhanced citizenship. Our vision is that Portugal will continue to consolidate its position in Europe as a digital innovation hub with highly skilled talent. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Dushan, and all distinguished speakers for the session 2. It's really fruitful discussion we have. So now we are entering to the afternoon break before we enter the afternoon session. Now we will have 1 hour break. We will start at 14. Please do reconnect with us at 14. We will have a session 3 about response and recovery to the pandemic, how to build a digital accessible. And also we will have the award ceremony of our 15 finalists. So now you can take the coffee, have a nice lunch break, and we will see you at 14. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rati. Was it okay?
This is really interesting, and you can see there's a lot of Q&A sessions, and it's very interactive. Thank you so much, Dushan.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day. See you soon.
Yeah, see you. Bye.
Hi, I'm Andre from SignLab, and we are making sign language accessible for everyone. And learning sign language is hard. In countries such as the Nordics, less than 75% of parents to deaf children are able to learn sign language well enough, such that it does not adversely affect their own child's development. When you see a statistic like this, you know that an important problem is not being solved. And that is why we are so excited to show you Toleo, which is our modern learning platform for sign language. Here you can pick a topic that is of interest to you, and you can learn it in a fun and engaging manner. And later you can review what you've learned in our optimal reviewing tool. If you want to look up a sign on the go, you can do so in our dictionary. And this satisfies AAA rating for educational products, where it increases availability, it lowers costs, and at the same time, it improves learning outcomes.
Tuleo is convenient, easy, and the elements of the gamification makes it very fun. And it's very pleasing to send to extended families and friends to invite them to learn even more of our new family language, sign language. We love Tuleo.
World in Sign. What is our vision? Stop. Let's talk about some facts first. In Germany, there are about 80,000 deaf people and 13 million people who are hard of hearing. Okay, what does the situation look like in Europe? There are 2 million deaf people and over 50 million hard of hearing people. Do they have access to communication in their native language and equal participation in society? We can provide equal participation through sign language interpreters. What's the issue? Cost absorption must be clarified. Organization in advance of the assignment. Stress is pre-programmed. Out of 31 European countries, over 50% have an online interpreting service, but only 18% have an interpreting app. We have the solution: effective use and access to interpreters through our interpreter app, Wiz app. This app is connected to an organized interpreter station where sign language interpreters can work flexible or planned all day. Deaf and hearing people can request an interpreter online at any time. And what about the accessible emergency call? Out of 31 European countries, only 12% offer emergency fax. Out of 31 European states, only 22% offer an app solution. Out of 31 European states, 0% offer an emergency call app with sign language capability. Does emergency fax or SMS mean accessibility? No. We have the solution. An accessible emergency call is included in the Wiz app. Send an emergency call with the push of a button. A sign language interpreter is added and starts calling at the same time. Continue to implement, improve, and develop our app. We are working on disaster response, telemedicine, and accessible calls that should be free and easy. For all people, for barrier-free communication, for inclusion.
The world is blind to deaf people. We are many, yes, but we are also invisible. Perhaps because deafness is not visible, because we do not require a wheelchair or a guide dog. As it seems that nothing happens to us, people assume that there is nothing wrong with us. No one suspects that our problems go far beyond simple things, like not being able to enjoy pop rock, or being doomed to watch television without subtitles. our problems are actually many more. No one suggests that if your child cries, you will not listen. No one suggests that if the washing machine finishes, you will not realize. That you can be at home, not knowing that the fire alarm's been sounding for 5 minutes, and the fire is dangerously approaching. That if at the airport there is any notice of time or gate changing, you might miss the flight. You may also lose your turn at the doctor's waiting room, as you don't reply when you're being called. No one realizes that we always live abroad, as the world speaks a language we do not understand, and we speak one that the world does not understand either. Deaf people, we are not only deaf, we are alone. Well, we were, until now. Visualfy is the only international software development platform and accessible technology for people with hearing difficulties. They see us, listen to us, and support us. That's why they have created a revolutionary device called Deaf Smart Space, a pioneering system that listens to the sounds at home and sends all the information completely adapted to your smartphone, smartwatch, or smart TV. For instance, 2 green vibrations, someone is ringing the doorbell. 3 yellow vibrations, the baby is crying. 4 red vibrations, danger, the fire alarm is sounding. All in a single device that will soon be present in hospitals, municipalities, subways, cruises, airports, museums, turning the near future into an equal place for everyone. Visualfy. Good things are coming.
Hi, my name is Ayala from Project Gray. We enable social accessibility and digital inclusion for elderly people with severe sight problems.
More than 280 million people around the world are visually impaired. Most of them are over 50. These people don't have access to a smartphone and they aren't able to enjoy the benefits of it. What we do at Gray is provide a solution that can turn any smartphone into an easily accessible device using our unique software innovation and RayClick, 2 adhesive stickers consisting of 4 buttons that easily connect to your phone via Bluetooth and with which you can control it completely.
ITU and European Commission are committed to making Europe more accessible through ICTs. For people with disabilities and specific needs, information and communication technologies are fundamental enablers to living independent lives and having an active role in society. From the 23rd to the 25th of March 2021, policymakers, experts, civil society associations, tech companies, academia will come together at Accessible Europe in Portugal. Join us at Accessible Europe and take active part in making Europe more accessible.
is full of amazing art. We are all familiar with unique Van Gogh paintings, the world's most daring paintings by Picasso, and who would not recognize famous Mona Lisa? We enjoy wonderful visual art on digital screens on a daily basis. But what about people who cannot see? Do you ever think about them? Well, we do. At Feel If we strive to bring art closer to everybody. Can you imagine to feel colors? Can you imagine to feel painting? With Feel If you can. This is Miha. He is blind all his adult life, but he still enjoys colors of nature. He likes to take photos with Feel If and discover a beauty around him. Although he is blind, he still likes to visit natural attractions, enjoys the view from the castle, goes to the museum and even to the gallery. Feel If tablets are using a special grid and a combination of haptic, audio and visual feedback that enable the blind user to literally feel digital pictures. Feel If brings huge value to museums, galleries and individual artists. It transforms museums and galleries into inclusive institutions. Feel If gives individual modern artists the opportunity to make their art accessible also to the blind and partially sighted. It doesn't matter if you are a photographer or a painter. With special app Feel Bookmaker, you can bring your art to another level by adding sound and vibration to the image. Any visual art can become multi-sensory. So, the final product is art that comes to life when touched by the user. Imagine that. For more information about Feel If, go to www.feelif.com.
Hi, my name is Melanie. For me, school was hell. The learning materials were too complicated, and the teachers were far too fast. When I was 14, people thought I would never learn anything useful. Today, I know I can learn anything. I just need my own time and texts that I can understand.
My name is Walburga, and I know a lot of people with learning difficulties who share Melanie's experiences. They could live self-determined lives, but complicated information holds them back. For them, complicated information is like a barrier, like stats are a barrier for people in a wheelchair.
Until now, I could only get easy to understand information when business hired a professional to translate the text for me. But this takes way too long. I am excited that Capito is now developing a tool that enables everyone to write barrier-free texts.
Capito Digital is an online tool that assists you with writing easy-to-understand texts. It is based on artificial intelligence. With Capito Digital, you can check if your texts are easy to read, and it supports you to provide barrier-free information. We cannot solve all problems only by informing people in an easy-to-understand way, but without easy-to-understand information, we will not be able to solve a single problem at all.
With Capito Digital, there are no more excuses. Anyone can write easy-to-understand texts, and these texts enable me and other people with learning difficulties to live self-determined lives.
We all need an accessible emergency call to protect our most precious asset, our health and our lives. The existing problem is that some billion people in the world cannot make an emergency call by phone. In today's digital age, for example, deaf or speech-impaired people should send an emergency fax in case of an emergency. But is this inclusion and participation in the emergency call system? We have the solution that can be implemented immediately and worldwide. Our barrier-free emergency call system has been developed for all people in this world. In case of an emergency, all relevant information is transmitted to the control center and first responders in a matter of seconds at the touch of a button, without a call, without language, without local knowledge, and without language skills. The conventional 5W questions, who, where, when, what happened, and how many people are affected, including a photo and audio documentation, and emergency passport are transmitted in an emergency. We have recognized which emergency call system people with health impairments in particular need and patented our invention for this purpose. Everyone, and also deaf-blind people, can make an emergency call, self-determined by feeling and clicking with our mobile emergency call button. For endless years, the introduction of barrier-free emergency calls has been promised by many actors. So why should we wait when the solution is available? Let's go into implementation together immediately and start the accessibility in the emergency call system to help all people.
Here are some quotes from users of CRPD, and they explain how it has benefited their lives. So Richard Holmes is a student, and he says, CRPD Plus gave me independence and freed up time from worrying about how something was written to concentrating on the content that I had written. He worked more independently and was far more productive. Stafford Dyslexia Support introduced Claro PDF to some students, and he said the students achieved things today that they didn't think possible at the start of the session. They worked so hard and I was so proud I could have burst. It really reduces stress and removes barriers to learning. Andy, he's a workplace assessor, and he found that one social worker who had not submitted an expense claim for over a year, but once she had CRPD, she caught up and very quickly realised just how much money she had been losing. Claro Reed makes people more independent, said Andy, and it can also save them money. You can feel less fatigued as well and far more focused on your work. Hayley Peters, she's a teacher, and she says that before using Claro Reed, I would spend hours rereading the same passage in order for me to understand it. So it saves lots of time and increases your confidence too. Peter Gustin, it has changed his life. He says, it is no exaggeration for me to say that the Claro Reed software saved my career and changed my life. You hear my voice on every continent of the globe, and it's honestly and truly been made possible by this software. Thanks, Claro Reed. So many people have really benefited from the Claro Reed software.
Due to aging of the population, pressure on care is increasing. There are much more care-needing seniors than caregivers providing the right care. Hence, we need to look for new models to organize care.
My name is Philip Van Oot. I am CEO of MagicView. The issue at hand is the so-called care pyramid. Care intensifies proportional to the age. As we all are getting older and older, society cannot sustain quality care because the costs are just skyrocketing. Sponsored by the AL Project Janus, MagicView has developed a home care platform that combines cost control with the desire for quality of life by using smart technology. The trick is that you regard the senior as a full-fledged consumer who likes to integrate such smart technology into his daily life. We equip the younger seniors with a very advanced home automation system, allowing him to control any appliance in his residence, as if he were a walking remote control himself. When he grows older, the same equipment will serve as movement coach, as we can observe his movements and activities. And eventually, we will also be able to improve safety of the resident. Suppose that I am not sitting on that sofa but lying 30 centimeters lower on the ground. I will also be able to observe that, and I can already call the emergency services when such an incident occurs. This way, we will be able to work on what we call the health literacy, which means that the senior will also invest in his own quality of life. You have to start from day one, having full cognitive skills to learn. If you start at later age, he may no longer be able to make such investment in this health literacy, causing him to do early appeal on the more expensive tiers of professional care. That is why we target our Janus home care platform to seniors who are moving over from their family home, now a size too big, to a home equipped for their future.
people with mobility impairments, hearing impairments, visual impairments, and senior travelers in need of assistance. There are over 600 million disabled people in the developed world, 70% of whom travel. Unfortunately, most travel agencies struggle to cater to this unique market segment, resulting in inadequate service and the loss of customers. Introducing Travexy. It instantly turns travel agencies and platforms into disability travel experts. Travexy built the first API for seniors and disabled travelers, enabling travel platforms to make bookings for them a breeze. Travexy API certifies and rates hotels by accessibility amenities according to 90 different accessibility parameters. So this is how your booking platform can look like. Travel agents simply choose one or more disability-type subfilters, and your system automatically finds properties for the specific disability requirements. Airlines require 48 hours notification before servicing travelers with disabilities. Travexy takes this hassle away from platform users and travelers with a simple API call. Travexy also integrates seamlessly with your existing booking process. There is no need to change service providers, and there are no integration fees either. But most importantly, we help travelers with accessibility needs enjoy travel just like everyone else. Improve your services for travelers with accessibility needs and grow your market share. Travexy, accessible travel solutions.
The world is full of amazing art. We are all familiar with unique Van Gogh paintings, the world's most daring paintings by Picasso, and who would not recognize famous Mona Lisa? We enjoy wonderful visual art on digital screens on a daily basis. But what about people who cannot see? Do you ever think about them? Well, we do. At Feel If we strive to bring art closer to everybody. Can you imagine to feel colors? Can you imagine to feel painting? With Feel If you can. This is Miha. He is blind all his adult life, but he still enjoys colors of nature. He likes to take photos with Feel If and discover a beauty around him. Although he is blind, he still likes to visit natural attractions, enjoys the view from the castle, goes to the museum and even to the gallery. Feel If tablets are using a special grid and a combination of haptic, audio and visual feedback that enable the blind user to literally feel digital pictures. Feel If brings huge value to museums, galleries and individual artists. It transforms museums and galleries into inclusive institutions. Feel If gives individual modern artists the opportunity to make their art accessible also to the blind and partially sighted. It doesn't matter if you are a photographer or a painter. With special app Feel Bookmaker, you can bring your art to another level by adding sound and vibration to the image. Any visual art can become multi-sensory. So, the final product is art that comes to life when touched by the user. Imagine that. For more information about Feel If, go to www.feelif.com.
Hello. hello, Mela. Marina.
Hello,
speaking.
hello, Marina. Hi.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Yes, Umberto is also with us. Mrs. Akiko Ito.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Hello, good to see you, Roxana. Good to see you too.
Good to see you too, Amela.